Steel crunched against bone in the sparring ring. The alien instructor didn't stop when the boy tapped out. He didn't stop when the cracking echoed across the drill hall. He only stopped when a shadow detached from the bleachers, exhaling a breath that chilled the room to absolute zero. The Vanguard Academy orbited a pale blue giant, a sprawling station built of white polymer and spun glass. They called this the golden age of the Coalition. Poverty was an abstract concept. War was a mathematical error solved by diplomats centuries ago. The Academy was supposed to be the shining jewel of this era, a place where the brightest minds from 100 unified worlds came to learn the pristine art of peacekeeping. Morgan hated it. She hated the sterile smell of the air scrubbers, which stripped every molecule of ozone and sweat from the corridors. She hated the soft, ambient lighting designed to soothe multiocular species. Most of all, she hated the quiet. On Earth, silence meant an ambush. Here, it just meant everyone was too polite to say what they actually thought. Morgan sat in the mess hall, pushing a cube of synthesized protein around her tray. She was a head shorter than most of the cadets in the room, her frame dense and tightly wound. Her standard-issue grey uniform hung awkwardly on shoulders, built for carrying 80-pound packs through mud, not presenting a crisp silhouette for parade drills. Across from her sat Ben. Ben was everything the Coalition thought humanity should be. He was bright-eyed, slender, and possessed a brain that could calculate hyperspace vectors in his sleep. He wore his uniform with pride, even if the sleeves were a fraction too long. He was 19, 2 years younger than Morgan, but he looked like a child next to her. Earth had spat them both out, but it had chewed Morgan for a decade first. "You're not eating," Ben said, tapping his fork against his own tray. "Not hungry." Morgan watched a group of senior cadets glide past. They were tall, elegant beings with pale skin and secondary joints that gave them a fluid, dancer-like grace. They didn't look at the humans. They never did. "You need the calories, Morgan. Tomorrow is endurance testing. Knox is running the simulator." Ben's voice dropped a register at the name. He picked at his food, his optimism faltering for a split second. Commander Knox. The name tasted like ash in Morgan's mouth. Knox was a veteran of the border skirmishes before the Golden Age fully solidified. He was massive, built like a brick wall covered in dark, leathery scales, though his uniform was tailored to hide the worst of his bulk. He didn't believe humans belonged in the Academy. Deathworlders, he called them. Brutes. Animals who hadn't evolved past the need to smash things with rocks. "I'll be fine," Morgan said, her voice a low gravel scrape. "I'm worried about you. You're an astrogator, Ben. You shouldn't even be in the combat rotations." "Standardized curriculum," Ben sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. They were an anachronism, a physical flaw the Academy's medical bay offered to fix on day one. Ben refused. He said they helped him think. Morgan knew he just liked having something between his eyes and the rest of the galaxy. "Every cadet has to pass basic physical compliance. It's just holding a line. Knox can't actually hurt us. The safety protocols..." "Protocols break," Morgan interrupted. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. The sleeves of her uniform pulled back, revealing a thick, jagged scar running from her wrist to her elbow, a souvenir from a feral dog pack back in the ruins of old Chicago. "Knox doesn't like us. He doesn't like you. You ask too many questions. You fix his tactical errors on the board. I was just optimizing the supply lines. You made him look stupid in front of the brass." Morgan picked up her protein cube and took a bite. It tasted like damp cardboard. "Stay at the back of the formation tomorrow. If he calls for volunteers, look at the floor. If he orders you to the front, fake a stomach cramp." Ben offered a weak smile. "It's a civilized galaxy, Morgan. We aren't in the slums anymore. He's a professional. Morgan looked past Ben, her eyes locking onto the heavy double doors of the mess hall. Commander Knox had just walked in. He moved with a heavy, rhythmic thud, his boots striking the polished floor like a hammer. 2 subordinate officers flanked him. He paused, his reptilian eyes scanning the room. They settled on the human table. For a long, agonizing second, Knox stared at them. A slow, terrifying imitation of a human smile stretched across his wide mouth, displaying rows of flat, crushing teeth. Then he turned and walked toward the officers' lounge. Morgan swallowed the dry paste in her mouth. The silence in the room suddenly felt very loud. "He's a professional," Morgan echoed, her tone flat. "Right, Sector 4. Sparring deck was a vast, circular arena designed to simulate variable gravities and atmospheres. Today, the atmospheric scrubbers were turned off, leaving the air thick, humid, and smelling faintly of ammonia. The gravity was dialed up to 1.5 standard Gs. For the elegant, towering cadets of the core worlds, it was exhausting. For Morgan, it felt like putting on a comfortable winter coat. For Ben, it was a slow, crushing nightmare. He stood in the 3rd rank of the formation, his knees trembling slightly under the added weight. Sweat plastered his thin hair to his forehead. Morgan stood in the front rank, her breathing slow and steady, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Commander Knox paced the perimeter of the sparring ring. He wore a heavy combat rig, the dark composite plates interlocking over his scales. He carried a training baton, a dense polymer rod that didn't cut but shattered bone through concussive force. "Endurance," Knox's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustic dampeners in the ceiling. "It is not merely a physical trait, it is a mental state. The coalition survives because it outlasts its enemies. It does not break. It does not yield." He stopped pacing and turned toward the cadet formation. "But some species," Knox continued, his eyes drifting lazily toward the human contingent, "are brittle. They rely on erratic bursts of adrenaline. Animal instinct. When the adrenaline fades, they snap." Morgan didn't blink. She felt the heavy gaze of the alien commander wash over her. But she gave him nothing. No anger, no defiance. Just a blank, impenetrable wall. Knox sneered, disappointed by her lack of reaction. His eyes moved down the ranks. "Cadet Ben!" Knox barked. Morgan's jaw locked. Behind her, she heard the sharp intake of Ben's breath. "Sir!" Ben squeaked. He stepped out of the formation, his boots dragging heavily on the rubberized matting. "Step into the ring, cadet." "Sir, I am slated for astrogation and fleet tactics. My physical compliance was signed off by..." "Step into the ring." Knox's voice dropped an octave, the predatory rumble vibrating in the floorboards. Ben swallowed hard, adjusted his glasses, and walked past Morgan. She didn't move her head, but her eyes tracked him. He looked incredibly small. "Defend yourself," Knox said, tossing his baton aside. He cracked his knuckles, the sound like thick tree branches snapping. "Hand to hand, show me the legendary resilience of the Deathworld." "Commander," Morgan spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the heavy air of the arena. "Cadet Ben is not rated for heavy gravity sparring. Protocol dictates..." "Silence!" Knox roared, turning his massive head toward her. "You will hold your tongue, Cadet Morgan, or you will be confined to quarters and expelled before the week is out. You do not speak unless spoken to." Morgan fell silent, her fists clenching at her sides. Knox turned back to Ben. "Begin." Ben barely had time to raise his arms before Knox moved. For a creature so massive, the commander was devastatingly fast. He didn't throw a punch, he simply stepped forward and backhanded Ben across the chest. The impact lifted the boy off his feet, sending him flying backward to crash against the reinforced energy barrier of the ring. Ben gasped, sliding to the floor, clutching his ribs. He tried to scramble up, gasping for air in the dense gravity. "Weak!" Knox grunted. He closed the distance in 2 strides. Ben threw a desperate, wild punch. Knox caught the boy's fist in his massive hand. The commander didn't twist or throw him. He just squeezed. Morgan heard the sound, a wet, sickening crunch of metacarpals turning to powder. Ben screamed. It was a high, tearing sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He dropped to his knees, his face pale, his glasses slipping off his nose to shatter on the floor. "Pain is a neurological response," Knox lectured the silent watching class. He casually twisted Ben's crushed hand, forcing the boy to bow backward to avoid his arm snapping. "A superior species overrides it. An animal is consumed by it." "Yield!" Ben sobbed, slapping his free hand against the mat. "I yield! I tap out!" Knox didn't let go. "There is no yielding on a battlefield, cadet." The commander kicked Ben's leg out from under him. The sickening pop of a dislocated knee followed. Ben collapsed onto his back, writhing, his breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating shrieks. "Commander!" Cadet Davis, a tall alien from the inner systems, stepped forward, his face pale. "The cadet has yielded. The exercise is over. Step back into formation, Davis," Knox warned, not looking away from Ben. He placed his heavy combat boot on Ben's uninjured chest. "He hasn't learned the lesson. Earth sends us their refuse. They expect us to polish dirt into diamonds." Knox applied pressure. Ben gagged, his face turning a terrifying shade of blue. Morgan's heart rate didn't spike. It plummeted. The hot, suffocating rage that usually accompanied a fight evaporated, replaced by a cold, absolute silence. The polished walls of the Vanguard Academy faded. The clean air, the rules, the threat of expulsion, they ceased to exist. All that remained was the predator in the ring, and the prey bleeding on the mat. She stepped forward. "Cadet Morgan." Knox didn't look up, but he felt the shift in the room's energy. "Take one more step and your career is over. You will be sent back to the slums in chains." Morgan didn't say a word. She walked to the edge of the sparring ring. The energy barrier hummed, a pale blue wall of hard light, designed to keep combatants inside and spectators out. It was rated to withstand a plasma blast. She reached out and placed her bare hands flat against the humming energy. Knox laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "What are you doing, ape? That barrier will burn your flesh off before it—" Morgan dug her fingers into the microscopic seams of the hard light projector track on the floor. Her muscles bunched, the fabric of her uniform tearing at the shoulders. She didn't use adrenaline. She used the bone-deep, terrifying density forged by a planet with crushing gravity, volatile weather, and a history of endless warfare. She ripped the projector track out of the floor. Sparks showered the air as the barrier flickered and died with a heavy electronic whine. The cadets in the front row stumbled backward in shock. Knox finally looked up, his mocking smile faltering. Morgan stepped over the broken machinery. Her eyes were empty, dark voids. She wasn't a cadet anymore. She was a weapon off safe. "Guards!" Knox shouted, suddenly realizing the gravity of the quiet human walking toward him. 2 Academy sentries, tall, armored beings armed with shock rifles, rushed into the ring from the far doors. Morgan didn't even break stride. As the first guard lunged, aiming the butt of his rifle at her head, she dropped beneath the arc. She drove a heel into his kneecap. The joint inverted with a loud snap. As he fell, she grabbed the barrel of his rifle, ripped it from his grip, and swung it like a bat into the side of the second guard's helmet. The composite visor shattered, and the guard crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. She tossed the rifle aside. The whole exchange took less than 3 seconds. Knox released Ben, pulling his heavy combat knife from his belt. "You want to die for this runt? Come on, then." Morgan closed the distance. Knox thrust the blade forward, aiming for her center mass. It was a fast strike, perfectly executed. But Morgan wasn't where she was supposed to be. She sidestepped, the heavy blade slicing through the empty air where her chest had been a fraction of a second prior. She didn't strike Knox's armored plates. She targeted the joints. Her left hand shot out, grabbing Knox's wrist just below the gauntlet. Her right hand clamped down on his elbow. She pivoted, using his own forward momentum and his massive weight against him. Knox stumbled. Morgan planted her boots, her back pressing against Knox's chest. She locked his arm straight over her shoulder. Knox roared, trying to pull back, but he was trapped in a fulcrum. "You insolent!" Morgan dropped her center of gravity and pulled down with everything she had. Physics is a merciless master. Knox was heavy, his bones thick and his muscles dense. But the leverage was perfect, and human muscle, when pushed to its absolute kinetic limit, possesses a horrific amount of torque. The first sound was the tearing of the thick, leathery suit. The second sound was the popping of the joint capsule, a wet, suction-like noise. Knox screamed. It wasn't a roar of anger, it was a shriek of unadulterated primal agony. Morgan didn't stop. She gritted her teeth, blood vessels bursting in her eyes, turning the whites a faint, terrifying crimson. She planted one foot heavily on the back of Knox's knee, forcing him down, and twisted violently to the right. Tendons snapped like thick steel cables. Muscle tore with the sound of ripping canvas. Bone sheared against bone. With a final horrific wrench, the arm came free. Blood, thick, dark and smelling of copper and sulfur, erupted from Knox's shoulder, splashing across the grey mats. Knox collapsed, a massive, thrashing heap, clutching the bleeding stump where his right arm used to be, his screams devolving into wet, blubbering gasps. The arena was dead silent. The cadets were paralyzed, their eyes wide with a terror they had never known. The Golden Age had just been violently introduced to Earth. Morgan stood over the fallen commander. Her chest heaved. Her face was speckled with alien blood, but her expression remained completely, chillingly blank. She looked down at the massive severed arm still gripped in her hands. The heavy combat knife was still locked in its dead fist. It weighed nearly 40 pounds. She shifted her grip, holding it by the torn bicep, letting the blood drip onto the floor. Slowly, she turned around and walked over to Ben. The boy was staring at her, wide-eyed, trembling, his crushed hand cradled against his chest. Morgan knelt beside him. Her voice was soft, devoid of the violence she had just unleashed. "Can you walk?" My knee," Ben whimpered, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. Morgan slung the severed arm over her left shoulder. With her right hand, she grabbed Ben by his collar and hauled him gently to his single good leg, supporting his weight against her hip. She looked up at the sea of terrified cadets, her gaze sweeping over them until they parted like water, clearing a wide path to the exit. No one spoke. No one moved to stop her. Morgan supported Ben, walking him out of the sparring arena. She left a trail of dark, thick blood down the pristine, white corridors of the Vanguard Academy. They walked for 10 minutes, past horrified instructors and frozen security details, until the sliding doors of the medical bay hissed open. A senior medical officer, a tall, spindly alien with 4 arms, dropped his datapad at the sight of them. Morgan walked to the reception desk. She let the massive, severed arm slide off her shoulder. It hit the polished metal desk with a heavy, wet thud, knocking over a container of sterile styluses. She looked the medical officer dead in the eye. "Fix my friend," Morgan said. "The isolation cell was designed to break the mind, without touching the body. It was a perfect sphere of seamless, glowing white polymer. There were no corners to anchor the eye, no shadows to provide depth, and no sound save for the microscopic hum of the life support vents. For the highly social, sensory-dependent species of the Coalition core worlds, 48 hours in the sphere usually resulted in a weeping, pliable confession. Morgan slept for 36 of them. She woke when the floor finally hummed, flattening out into a heavy metallic grate as the containment field adjusted. The blinding white light dimmed to a dull, bruised purple. A section of the wall dissolved into a doorway. Admiral Arthur Blake stepped through. He was an old man by Earth standards, his hair a shock of iron grey, his face mapped with deep, sun-baked wrinkles from campaigns waged before humanity had been invited into the Golden Age. He wore the formal black and gold dress uniform of the Coalition fleet, a stark contrast to the sterile environment. Blake didn't speak immediately. He looked at Morgan. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor. Her grey cadet uniform was stiff with dried, dark alien blood. Her hands rested on her knees, the knuckles swollen and purple. "You tore his arm off," Blake said. His voice was a dry rasp, devoid of judgment, but heavy with consequence. "Yes, sir," Morgan replied. "With your bare hands?" "Yes, sir," Blake sighed, pulling a small silver flask from his coat pocket. He unscrewed the cap, took a slow pull, and offered it to her. Morgan shook her head. Blake capped it and tucked it away. "The medical bay reattached it," Blake continued, pacing a slow circle around her. "It took 6 surgical drones and their chief of medicine 14 hours. The nerve damage is extensive. Commander Knox will likely never have full motor function in that limb again. He is demanding you be executed under the Military Sedition Act. Failing that, he wants you remanded to a penal colony on a dead world." Morgan looked up. Her eyes were calm, dark, and flat. "How is Cadet Ben?" Blake stopped pacing. He looked down at the young woman, a flicker of something resembling pity crossing his weathered face. "Stable. His knee required a synthetic joint replacement. His hand—" Blake paused. "They had to rebuild the bone structure from scratch. He'll keep the hand, but his career in the Vanguard Academy is over. He's being medically discharged." Morgan's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in her cheek. It was the only sign of emotion she had shown since she dropped the alien commander's severed limb on the reception desk. "He was going to be an astrogator," Morgan whispered. "He's going to be alive," Blake corrected sharply. "Which is more than I can say for you if we don't play this exactly right. Do you understand what you've done, Cadet? You didn't just assault a superior officer. You shattered the illusion." Morgan stood up. Her joints popped loudly in the quiet room. She was stiff, her muscles aching from the sheer kinetic output of the fight. "The illusion that humans are tamed? The illusion that the Coalition is untouchable," Blake snapped, closing the distance between them. "This is the Golden Age, Morgan. These people haven't fought a planetary war in 1,000 years. They fight skirmishes with pirates. They suppress localized rebellions using remote drone strikes. They think violence is a math equation. You brought a butcher shop into their pristine ivory tower. You terrified them. Knox was torturing a 19-year-old boy," Morgan said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating low. "He crushed Ben's hand long after he yielded. He broke his knee for sport. If their Golden Age allows a sadistic monster to hide behind a uniform, then their Golden Age is a lie. I just showed them what real violence looks like." "I know," Blake said quietly. "I reviewed the security footage before they classified it. You acted to preserve the life of a fellow cadet. Under Earth military doctrine, you'd be getting a medal." Blake turned his back to her, staring at the purple energy field holding them in the room. "But we aren't under Earth doctrine," Blake continued. "We are the newest, lowest-ranking members of this alliance. They let us in because they need our labor, our resources, and our willingness to do the dirty jobs they find distasteful. They view us as useful brutes. Now they view us as a liability. So they execute me, Morgan said. It wasn't a question. It was an acceptance. Not if I can help it, Blake countered, turning back around. The tribunal is in 2 hours. The High Arbiter will preside. The entire Council of Primes will be watching. They are going to put you on display to prove that their system of justice works. They are going to try to paint you as a rabid dog that needs to be put down. And what do you want me to do, Admiral? Beg? No. Blake stepped close, his dark eyes locking onto hers. I want you to be exactly what you are. They want to judge a Deathworlder? Let them look one in the eye. You don't apologize. You don't cry. You tell them the truth. If we try to play their political game, we lose. Our only play is blunt force. Blake reached out and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. You protected your own, Blake said, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. You did right by that boy. Let me do right by you. When you get in there, you hold the line. I always hold the line, sir, Morgan said. Blake offered a grim, razor-thin smile. I know. Wash your face. The guards will be here in 10 minutes. The Grand Assembly Hall was an architectural marvel designed to make the individual feel utterly insignificant. The vaulted ceiling was made of transparent diamantine, showcasing the swirling gas giants and star fields of the sector. The floor was polished black obsidian. Floating in the center of the vast room were the tiered podiums of the Council of Primes. Morgan stood on a circular platform in the absolute center of the hall. She was surrounded by a glowing red containment ring. Her wrists and ankles were locked in heavy magnetic shackles. The metal cuffs weighed 30 pounds each, designed to ground heavy world species. Morgan simply stood, her posture perfectly straight, carrying the weight as if it were a heavy winter coat. A murmur rippled through the gathered dignitaries in the massive amphitheater surrounding the floor. Thousands of eyes, some singular, some compound, some cybernetic, stared down at the small, bruised human in the blood-stained uniform. High Arbiter Valen, a tall, impossibly slender being with iridescent skin and flowing robes of white silk, floated down on a repulsor pod to eye level with Morgan. Cadet Morgan of the Sol System, the Arbiter's voice echoed, translated seamlessly into standard English by Morgan's neural implant. The tone was melodic but icy. You stand accused of egregious insubordination, unprovoked assault, and the attempted murder of a coalition commanding officer. How do you plead? I plead justified intervention, Morgan's voice rang out. She didn't shout, but her voice carried a dense, heavy timbre that cut through the cavernous space. There is no such plea in coalition law, the Arbiter stated, waving a long, six-fingered hand. There is on Earth, Morgan replied instantly. A shocked gasp echoed from the gallery. To interrupt an Arbiter was unthinkable. To the right of the Arbiter, a secondary podium lowered. Commander Knox stood upon it. He looked vastly different from the invincible predator in the sparring ring. His grey skin was pale, ashen. His right arm was secured in a massive cybernetic brace, glowing with healing fields and structural supports. He looked at Morgan with a mixture of burning hatred and something he would never admit to. Fear. The human is a feral beast, Knox rumbled, his voice lacking its usual thunder. She bypassed safety protocols, disabled a Class 3 energy barrier with her bare hands, and attacked me from behind while I was instructing. Instructing? The voice belonged to Admiral Blake. He stood at a defense podium to Morgan's left. Is that what we call the deliberate maiming of a yielded cadet, Commander? The boy was soft, Knox sneered. He required a practical demonstration of endurance. He yielded, Blake countered, his voice rising. He tapped a command on his console. A massive holographic projection flared to life above the assembly floor. It was the security footage from Sector 4 sparring deck. The audio was crystal clear. It showed Knox backhanding Ben. It showed Ben begging, yielding, tapping out. And it played the wet, horrifying crunch of Knox crushing the boy's hand. The gallery fell completely silent. The sound of the breaking bones was a brutal intrusion into their sanitized world. "This is your instructor," Blake addressed the council. "This is the man entrusted with molding the next generation of peacekeepers." He ignored standard surrender protocols to torture a cadet half his size. "It was an exercise," Knox roared. "And this animal tore my arm from my body. Look at her. She shows no remorse. She is a sociopath." The High Arbiter raised a hand, silencing the room. He looked down at Morgan. "The actions of Commander Knox will be reviewed by an internal disciplinary board," the Arbiter said smoothly. "However, the Coalition operates on the principle of proportional response and the rule of law. If you had a grievance, Cadet Morgan, you were required to file a formal protest with the Academy overseers. Instead, you resorted to barbaric mutilation." The Arbiter leaned forward, his black, featureless eyes reflecting Morgan's chained form. "Tell me, Cadet, why did you not file a report? Why did you choose to butcher an officer of the Golden Age?" Morgan looked at the Arbiter. Then she looked at Knox. Finally, she looked up at the thousands of faces in the gallery. "Because a piece of paper doesn't stop a bleeding man," Morgan said. The sheer bluntness of the statement seemed to physically strike the Arbiter. He blinked, taken aback. Morgan took a step forward. The heavy magnetic chains dragged across the obsidian floor with a terrible, grinding screech. The guards in the room gripped their shock rifles tighter. "You call this the Golden Age," Morgan continued, her voice rising, filling the grand hall not with anger, but with a cold, absolute authority. "You sit in your glass towers and you legislate peace. You think because your streets are clean and your stomachs are full that the universe is safe. But the universe doesn't care about your laws." She raised her shackled hands, pointing a bruised finger directly at Knox. "He knows it. He fought on the borders. He knows that out there in the dark, the only thing that stops a monster is a bigger monster. You invited humanity into your coalition because your military is soft. You wanted our grit. You wanted our capacity for violence so you wouldn't have to get your hands dirty." "Silence!" the Arbiter commanded, slamming his palm against his podium. "You will not insult this assembly." "I am educating this assembly," Morgan barked back, her voice suddenly echoing like a gunshot. The Arbiter flinched. "You wanted Earth to send you soldiers," Morgan said, lowering her hands, the chains clanking heavily against her thighs. "But you expected us to act like politicians. You can't have both. When Commander Knox decided to torture my friend, he didn't break a coalition law. He broke a natural law. He proved he was a predator targeting the weak. And on my world, when a predator comes into your home and attacks your pack..." Morgan's eyes locked onto Knox. The massive alien commander actually took a subconscious step backward on his podium. "You don't file a report," Morgan finished, her voice dropping to a whisper that the acoustics of the room carried to every corner. "You take its teeth. You break its arm. You make sure it knows that if it ever reaches for your people again, you will take its head." "I didn't act out of anger, Arbiter. I acted out of necessity. I held the line. Silence reigned in the Grand Assembly Hall. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. The dignitaries looked at the human not with disgust, but with a creeping, existential dread. She was a mirror reflecting the violence they had spent centuries trying to pretend no longer existed. The Council of Primes conversed through private neural links, for several agonizing minutes. High Arbiter Volan's face remained a mask of polite indifference, but a tight tension pulled at the corners of his mouth. Finally, the Arbiter spoke. The Coalition cannot condone vigilante justice. To do so would invite chaos and the erosion of our fundamental principles. The Arbiter paused, looking over at Admiral Blake. However, the extenuating circumstances regarding Commander Knox's gross violation of combat protocols cannot be ignored. A profound failure of command initiated this incident. Knox opened his mouth to protest, but a glare from the Arbiter silenced him. "Cadet Morgan," the Arbiter proclaimed, "you are hereby stripped of your rank and expelled from the Vanguard Peacekeeping Academy, effective immediately." Morgan didn't blink. She had expected death. Expulsion was a mercy. "Furthermore," the Arbiter continued, his tone shifting into something pragmatic and cold, "given your demonstrated capacity for extreme physical pacification, returning you to civilian population is deemed a security risk. You are therefore drafted into the Deep Void Rangers. You will be deployed to the Outer Rim territories, where your specific brand of kinetic problem-solving is deemed necessary against pirate cartels and hostile incursions." A low murmur passed through the human delegation. The Deep Void Rangers. It was a suicide posting. It was where the Coalition sent its worst criminals and most dangerous assets to die quietly in the dark. "Do you understand the judgment of this council?" the Arbiter asked. Morgan looked at the chains on her wrists. She looked at Admiral Blake, who gave her a single, tight nod. She was alive. She had saved Ben, and she was being sent exactly where she belonged, back to the dark, where she could hunt the monsters the Golden Age pretended didn't exist. "I understand," Morgan said. "The tribunal is concluded. Guards, remove the prisoner and prepare her for transit." The medical bay smelled of ozone and synthetic flesh. Morgan stood in the doorway, wearing a fresh, unmarked black jumpsuit, the uniform of the Deep Void Rangers. She carried a single duffel bag over her shoulder. Ben was sitting up in a biobed. His right hand was encased in a regenerative gel cast. His right leg was elevated, suspended by anti-gravity fields. He looked pale and exhausted, but when he saw Morgan, a weak smile broke across his face. "I heard they're sending you to the Rim," Ben said, his voice raspy. Morgan walked into the room and dropped her bag by the bed. "They are. Ship leaves in an hour." "I heard Knox was quietly forced into early retirement," Ben added, looking down at his gel-encased hand. "They didn't want the scandal." "Good," Morgan said. Ben looked up at her, his eyes shining behind a new pair of perfectly issued medical-grade glasses. The anachronistic wireframes were gone, shattered on the sparring mat. He looked a little older, a little harder. "Morgan," Ben whispered, "you threw your whole life away. For me." Morgan reached out and gently tapped the side of his cast. It was a soft, surprisingly tender gesture from hands that had recently torn through bone and composite armor. "I didn't throw it away, Ben," Morgan said, offering him the first real smile she had shown since leaving Earth. "I just found a better use for it. You were meant to be an astrogator. You were meant to build things, to navigate, to figure out how this universe works." She leaned in, her voice steady and grounded. "The Golden Age needs people like you to keep it shining, but it needs people like me to guard the door. You learn the stars, Ben. I'll make sure nothing comes out of the dark to hurt you while you do it." Ben nodded, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "Hold the line, Morgan." "Always," Morgan replied. She picked up her duffel bag, turned her back on the sterile, glowing medical bay, and walked out to the launch pads. The Golden Age was behind her. The cold, brutal reality of the frontier was waiting. And for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, Morgan felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. If you enjoyed this descent into the gritty reality of a supposed golden age, smash that like button and subscribe for more original sci-fi dramas. Humanity doesn't back down, and neither do we when it comes to bringing you top-tier stories every single week. Share this video with your fellow Deathworlders, drop a comment below on what Morgan should do next, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. Stay strong, stay human, and keep watching.